Great. So, I realize that everything that stands between you and happy hour is us, so we'll keep this nice and organized. Just quiet, Brian. You'll get there. I will do this very simple way. Ideally, you'll hear me the least because we have a very, very strong panel today here at the climax of day 2. So what I'm going to do is first the household stuff, then I'm going to run through a few slides which just give you a little bit of a frame for the conversation, and then we're going to dive in and I'm going to poke these people with questions, and hopefully a massive discussion will erupt from all this. So the first household point is, as you can tell, that we have only 4 people on the panel, not 5. Unfortunately, our friend from Pokemon couldn't make it because of a family emergency. So, but with these 4, I think we can still do a lot of damage. And then from there on out, we can really just kind of start with who am I? My name is Joost, as was introduced. I'm both a professor at NYU, as well as founder and CEO of a research firm. My passion really for trading card games comes from the fact that in many, many ways it exists at the intersection of virtual items, complex game mechanics, collectability, social play, etc. And it really forms very much a, really just an intersection of all the things that games can be good at. A few years ago, we started off writing a white paper on this, and this has really been just an ongoing conversation as to what games, card games, collectible card games are, what they can do, and how they evolve over time in digital space. A few things about what I do during the day, which is, so we collect a lot of aggregated transaction data, which we then use to figure out who's doing well in free-to-play and online. This is where trading card games are sort of a pet project of my own. Moving on from there, so here are some of the slides that are mandatory for these things. So really what I wanted to kind of frame the discussion today about was this question as to why do digital card games and collectible card games all of a sudden become this hot topic today, right? What makes it so that this particular genre has emerged as one of the more successful ones and is really growing exponentially in some cases? Only yesterday, our friends at Inside Social read an article about how Zynga is looking at core gamers. And for me, that's sort of like a good way to start this conversation, saying, well, here's in fact a game mechanic that is very complex, right? So to learn how to play Magic the Gathering, it takes a little effort to manage and sort of internalize the basic mechanics. So if you put that against the generally assumed trend of social games being a mainstream form of gaming, you kind of wonder, well, what is it that this complex gameplay all of a sudden has to offer to people that you assume are familiar and looking for very simple and accessible gameplay? So the trend there, obviously, is that there is such a thing as mid-core gaming. Essentially, as people become more and more familiar with game mechanics, they are going to be looking for more complex gameplay, a little bit more depth over time. And that's where, as the last few months, you see this trend sort of emerge. So just as a definitional item, we're not looking at poker game stuff. Obviously, we're really talking specifically about trading card games, and in the digital space, often those are more referred to as collectible card games. So physical, everybody gets those, right? Whenever I teach my class, the first question I ask is, like, who of you have played Pokemon at some point in their life? And the entire classroom puts their hand in the air. Apparently this is, especially in the US, sort of a common denominator. Same thing goes for Yu-Gi-Oh, of course. And so that's sort of the common model. In the last couple of years, however, the transition to digital has really taken off. The different models are mobile, of course, browser-based, console, and downloadable or destination sites. So here we see an example of what Magic's been up to. They recently also launched Magic 2013 on the iPad. Here's an example of what Clash of the Dragons, I think, looks like, as well as, so basically the browser-based type games on Congregate and Facebook, etc. And then there's also mobile. So this is Assassin's Creed Recollections, as well as some of the things like Card Combat and Spirit Force from our Japanese friends. So there's a lot of activity in terms of how this game mechanic is finding its way onto mobile and digital platforms. When we then sort of expressed it into numbers, because obviously a business is a business, You see that the physical card game industry is stagnant in many ways. It's still very healthy, right? We're talking about $2 billion a year, which is nothing to snuff your nose at, but at the same time, the actual growth really comes from the digital component. So we ran a few forecasting scenarios. Even in a sort of conservative scenario, you're looking at, say, well over $700 million in about 2 years in just digital collectible card games. So, and that sort of matching that with the mid-core trend, saying, well, if we're looking at what people spend on average on a monthly basis, the people that play mid-core games, you see that the numbers really can be quite staggering. So we just laid out here mid-core for the US, and you see it's well over $100 in April alone, compared to, say, Germany, Spain, and Brazil. So with that in mind, that's sort of the background in terms of data and a few trends. I would first like to ask the panelists to, starting here with Brian, to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about what they're working on and how that's going.
Sure. My name is Brian David Marshall. I'm the general manager, lead designer for the New York office of Fifth Planet Games, formerly to be continued. We've basically been championing social trading card games, collectible card games with Fifth Planet. That's how we ended up getting acquired by them. Make a game called Clash of the Dragons, and another new game that we just launched called Legacy of Heroes. Both have been, super exciting, really well received, monetizing well. My history with trading card games goes back to about 1994, and if there's a job that you could have that involves trading card games, both physical and digital, I've had it. So.
I am Robert Winkler. I am the CEO of Fifth Planet Games. I also head design for the company. We have been in core for basically since launch, well before Facebook got on stage and told everybody that core is where you should go. So we've been focusing here on CCGs for a little over a year now, and had a lot of success with it. And Brian kind of covered most of what we've been working on.
Hey, I'm Dylan Collins. I'm also from Fifth Planet Games. No, I'm not, but I'm chairman of.
I'm in here.
No, yeah. I'm chairman of Fight My Monster. We are, I think, the fastest-growing online game for boys in the UK, although we've seen a lot of growth over in the US recently. So our game is it's free-to-play trading card game, fightmymonster.com. I suppose we're probably a little bit different in that our entire audience is under 13. So we're typically 8 to 12-year-old boys. We average out at about 8.5. The game was founded and designed by Dominic Williams in his garden office about a year and a half ago. We've recently expanded massively in San Francisco from 2.5 people to 9 people. We'll be catching up with Zynga pretty soon. And so we're mostly all based down in the Bay Area now. So I suppose the only point is to note that we're not probably the collectible in the traditional sense of the word. So all the cards that are created by the kids in game are actually unique. So you get to level them up, but it means there's a huge universe of games, of cards rather, in there. So we're a little bit different maybe to the classic CCG.
Hello, I'm ARAKI. I'm from GREE. So the GREE is the mobile social gaming network and also the mobile social game developers. We have many mobile free-to-play mobile social card games in Japan, also the worldwide market. And then we have several titles that those are earning the double-digit $1 million a month with the social card games. So now we started to expand very rapidly into the global market from last year, and now we have the 10 offices with several studios around the world, and also we just launched the global the mobile social gaming network several months ago, and also we have now over 200 million user base around the world.
Excellent. So really, as a start-off question, so now that we know what everybody does, what can you guys share in terms of spending? Right? So if this is a sustainable business, then what is it that you can share in terms of ARPU, conversion rates, user base of people playing your games? Starting with Dylan.
Oh, thanks. So you're always going to start with the most difficult one first.
Yes.
So we're slightly different, as I said. So we have our audience is 8 to 12-year-old boys. We are very different in terms of play patterns to what you'll see in either social or mobile gaming across the board. So our play patterns are influenced by things like school vacations, weekends, and most critically, weather. Right. So our best time, our most revenue generating time is when the weather is particularly crap outside. One of the things that's blown a lot of people away about Fight My Monster, I think, has always been the engagement time. So we see sort of session times from players anywhere between 30 and 40 minutes, which is pretty insane, and it's always kind of blown us away. And even as we've moved into the US, so we've kind of doubled our audience here in the last 3 or 4 months, and session time is staying pretty much where it is in the UK as well. So clearly American kids and UK kids are sort of seeing the same thing with our game. From a monetization point of view, we sort of have a twin strategy, and again, because we're always going through the proxy of parents and parents' PayPal accounts or credit cards or things like that. So we recently announced a deal with Striker and Dimensional to start looking at kind of merchandising and licensing and things that way. Because, you know, parents generally tend to be much happier about buying a physical thing than they are about buying a virtual thing. And that will change over time, but right now it's going to be around probably for the foreseeable future. So we've a sort of a lightweight subscription in game, but then we're also doing the physical thing. So even though we're very much a digital trading card game, our monetization strategy is a mix of the virtual and the physical, particularly when it's raining.
I'll jump in. So we've had a lot of success recently going to different platforms, so our numbers have been kind of changing a bit over time. Congregate released some of our numbers about 6 months ago, so I can kind of talk about those. Our monthly ARPU on Clash, for example, I think at that point was about $60, but it's, you know, the game was about a month and a half old. We're at about 2.5 times that now, so we've seen some good growth there. Yeah, the DAU is pretty steady. It's a pretty sticky game. That's actually one of the things we're focusing on now, though. It's not quite to the standard that we have. I think we have about 30-35% DAU to MAU ratio. Mm-hmm. Our previous 2 games were closer to 50, though, and that's kind of what we're really pushing for. And yeah.
I think you, Yost, you were asking about spending and what we're spending to get people.
Yes.
One of our big strategies has been platform proliferation, so we've really been trailblazing onto new platforms. So we've been the first collectible card game on a lot of different social gaming platforms. And just, you know, we just launched on Kabam, we just launched on Armor Games, and we're the first collectible card games on those sites. And, you know, without spending any marketing dollars, you know, we just got 10,000 new qualified users today.
So far. I mean,
Yeah.
we'll probably make 25,000 installs today.
By the end of this panel.
Yeah.
Right.
Actually, that'd be nice.
So it's very exciting.
You guys are lucky. You're actually able to use some of those sharing channels and other platforms. The challenge we have in the under-13 space is that, officially at least, you know, those kids aren't on Facebook or email or even Twitter, right? Mm-hmm. So a huge amount of our growth and our real hardcore players comes from literal word of mouth in the literal playground. Which gives you a whole other set of dynamics when you're sort of trying to figure out how to market to kids. I mean, you've got to give them something big and obvious that they can go and tell the other kids about. Yeah. So it's in fact, we find probably one of the most effective channels is actually YouTube, because we see a ton of kids, a ton of players who are creating their own videos about their card collections, or so you can. We've a market exchange within the game, and what you'll see like a lot of 9 and 10 and 11-year-olds doing is they create this like 3 or 4 minute long video about how awesome this particular card is, and they'll post it up on YouTube. And even though, again, YouTube officially doesn't have under 13 players or kids there, that's where a huge amount of the actual unofficial sharing goes on, there in the playground.
Yeah. So we have several game categories in our portfolio, and so I can explain some how different compared to other game genre. And then in general, the social card games or card battle games has very, very strong monetization KPI compared to other simulation games. Mm-hmm. So I think in this market, average of up DAU, I mean average revenue per DAU is around few cents to up to 10 cents. And I can say it depends on the time, but in general, the card games has, I think, 8 times to 10 times higher the ARPDAU, which is very, very high. And then I don't know the game genre has those very high ARPU, the the performance. But I think relatively the retention rate will be a bit lower than other casual games. I think that is because of those some kind of mid-core type game genre will limit the audience. So I think the challenge we have is how we can improve the retention rate while we can keep the good monetization KPIs.
Very, very interesting. And it's just as a frame of reference. I remember that Konami had 4 million players for Dragon Collection a few months ago.
Yeah.
What's that number today? Can you tell us?
I think that's over the double-digit million.
It's above.
Yeah.
4, 5. Okay. So that's a substantial audience, right, in terms of people playing your game. So then when I hear these numbers, my first question is, of course, well, why is this working now, right? And maybe, Brian, this is a good question for you. So before Brian's company was acquired by Fifth Planet, he worked for another company called To Be Continued, which was part of Chaotic. Perhaps you can tell people a little bit about Chaotic and then share your thoughts on why it is that digital card games today seem to be much more of a viable model.
Well, sure. So Chaotic was a trading card game, a cartoon, a gaming platform that was created by 4Kids Entertainment. We were brought in just after they were locked into a lot of immovable plans for how the game was going to work to help design the game and to make sure that it could play on both. So you would get a physical card, you would buy a card, and then there'd be a code on the card, and you would enter that card into the, theoretically, browser interface that was supposed to have existed, and you would get a digital object that corresponded to that card. So you would have a deck of cards, and you would have a deck of cards online. And so it's great, right? Because like one of the big barriers to getting people into a collectible card game is critical mass, right? Like if I buy a deck of cards and I go to school and everyone's playing Yu-Gi-Oh! And I have Chaotic, I'm gonna go home and just throw them down at my mother's feet and just be like, Mom, you bought me this stupid game and nobody plays it and I'm not very cool and I hate it. But if you have a digital version of the game, you can go online, you can play it, you can meet other people, you can get engaged, you become an evangelist for the game. So it's a really great model that taught us a lot about what a physical card game could do and what a digital card game could do, and really how to keep those two things separate. And when we segued or pivoted or whatever the business term is now for getting out of that project and started looking for new things to do, we ended up forming a relationship with Fifth Planet Games to make digital card games. And we really embraced this idea of all the things you could do in a digital card game that you can't do, the bookkeeping, the idea of cards offering buffs, percentage chances for things to happen, things that would be impossible to really convey in a physical game and possible to calculate in a way that would be interesting, but are really good in digital. But I think I got a little bit off the track, which is, you just have a generation of people that have now grown up with trading card games, right? I've been playing trading card games since 1994. I've talked at your class a couple times and been there when everyone raises their hands and they all know Pokemon, they all know Yu-Gi-Oh! They've all played these games. And so you have a generation of people that are finally fluent in trading card game, in collectible card game. And so when you go on to Congregate or you go on to Kabam and you see a trading card game, I know that, I understand how those things work. I understand the basic components of a graveyard, a deck, a hand, a battle zone, and so I think the time is just really right. I think we have just a critical amount of people at every stage, at every demographic age, right? We have kids who are playing, the new Kaijudo game from Wizards, and older kids who are still playing Yu-Gi-Oh, and kids playing Pokemon, and adults playing Magic the Gathering to a degree that their wife finds disturbing, financially, I mean, and at every stage along the way, there's a game that people play that is just become a part of their lives. It becomes a piece of your economy. Like if you're a card player and you have, you're a kid and you have Yu-Gi-Oh cards, that's currency. You have money in your pocket. Yeah. If you're a Magic player and you're like, I want something, you're like, I guess I'll sell this dual land that I've been sitting on that's worth $1,000 now. They're very liquid. Right. So, people have just become really integrated into people's lives, and the ability to implement them digitally and the ability for people to know what they are has just all sort of come together perfectly right now to create a really fertile spot for digital card games.
I hear that Europe was considering it as a viable alternative to the euro, actually, as a currency.
You could have done a lot better investing in dual lands.
I think one of the interesting things too right now about the digital space is that I remember when I first started playing Magic in '95, like I did not understand the rules, and I had to like find a friend that played the game, and luckily he was able to explain to me. If I didn't have that friend, I might not have ever played that game. And so now we have these great, digital formats where we can explain, have a tutorial, and they don't have to understand all these complex mechanics when they first start playing the game. We can explain that out over time. So we're really fortunate to be able to design games in this space because of that.
And you can build the tutorial into gameplay,
Yeah.
so that finding out these rules and learning this isn't boring. It's actually an exciting journey of discovery. Right? You're like, oh, I get it. That's how you beat a flying creature, or that's how you heal damage, and that's like a little puzzle that you build into the early part of the game, and it's really exciting.
What percentage of your players like have a total knowledge of all the rules versus, let's say, not?
A very small percentage.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. But we designed it that way too. I mean, we definitely designed a game that we wanted to be engaging at first. You could pick it up in 5 minutes, but we say, you can learn it in 5 minutes, but take a lifetime to master. So we have this meta game, we have these kind of complex rules and situations, but you don't see that for a while. Like we lock out the highest level of PvP for a long time because you go in there, you're gonna get smashed, and that's not a good user experience. So yeah, I would say a very small percentage of them really completely understand every little thing, but they don't really necessarily have to. They just, we give them somewhat simple choices. A lot of the more of the strategy of that comes into the deck building and the understanding of different ways and different systems to do things. But yeah, you can still win. There'll definitely be some luck involved with having no idea what the cards do. Yeah. Which is good and bad. But.
So I think there are the two aspects, I think, that from the product side and also the market side. So at first, from the market side, especially, and I'm explaining about the smartphone, the App Store, and also Google Play market. So there is a significant change that happened last 1 year, which is the user acquisition cost. So now user acquisition cost is going up significantly, and it's very, very expensive. That means to justify the marketing expense, we have to have a very high LTV games from the players. And that encourages developers to develop more mid-core, hardcore games to justify the marketing expense. And then the card games has kind of naturally those kind of mid-core, hardcore players, and also it's have a good monetization KPI. Then that is kind of becoming relatively very popular in this market because those other casual games cannot do well with this user acquisition cost. That is the market change side. And also I think from the product side, I think, current discussion is very interesting because I think the collective card game is very good fit for the digital era because player can find the other players or the competitors in the online space very easily. And also player can play the card battle games asynchronously. In the real world, we have to gather into the one place and then play the asynchronous. But the mobile social game can kind of get rid of those limitations. And also, I think there are several innovations happen in the social card games. That is the one, as I said, the asynchronous gameplay. And also, the second one is we could a bit simplified the card battle games so that even light users, casual users can kind of get into the gameplay. And also, I think other side is we could get rid of the physical limitations of the card games. That is the number of the cards player can have or number of cards player can purchase. Because as a free-to-play game, we can give away the common cards or not so rare cards for many the cards for the players. And then we could also introduce the new game features, that is the fuse the card or evolve the card with using the several cards. So now the player can consolidate the 10 cards into the one card to get stronger. So I think those kind of the virtual, digital, the game mechanics innovation will help to the card battle games to be more popular.
I think that's a really interesting thing that you mentioned, right? Because so essentially it's the affordances of this new technology that allow fusion cards. It allows basically an unlimited number of cards in your deck. What about say synchronous play? right? How do you solve that problem? If I go online, can I play against another human, or am I playing against a computer? How should I imagine these things?
Well, one of the nice things I think about digital card games is, and just about card games in general, is the ability to have your deck be an expression of yourself, right? Like, so, you know, all these card games have different linear strategies and different mechanics built into them, and the strategies that you identify with will tend to, you know, line up with your personality type or what you want to do. Our COO always plays red decks when we play Magic. He likes to set things on fire. That's just his nature. But the idea is you get to build a deck, you get to customize it, and you know, you can play asynchronously by having your deck available, right? You know, we have our games set up so that they can be played, you know, with an AI of sorts. You know, you can just sort of play the game off the top of the deck, and so I can leave my deck and have someone come and play against it, and you know, I still get to feel like that there's some personal part of me in the deck that you played against, and if I beat you, I'm pretty excited about that.
Right. Dylan, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, synchronous and asynchronous is a bit tricky in the kid space because you've got this huge skew between when they play and when they don't, right? So I mean, you'd see something like 10, 12, maybe even 14 to 1 ratio between weekend play and weekday play, right? So that's why you've got to, particularly with Fight My Monster, you've got to give them a bit more to do than just battle each other and exchange.
Right.
At the same time, they're 10-year-old boys, right? They don't really give a shit too much about emotions and, you know, grown-up stuff like that. Do we ever? But you know, you've got to give them exploratory options. You've got to give them things that they can sort of adventure their way through within the game. And I think one of the big criticisms that Fight My Monster always gets when an adult logs into the game for the first time is, holy shit, I have no idea what's going on here. I'm completely lost. This is rubbish. 2 weeks later, they inevitably come back to us saying, you know what, I just put my kid in front of that and he loves it. You guys are geniuses. Right. And it's funny because my background is kind of social and a few other things, but you almost have to forget everything that you learned with analytical game design when you're dealing with sort of 10-year-olds, because they need to have the ability to explore, they need to be able to adventure, and when they haven't got people to play against, we're kind of at a size now, so we're about 1.5 million players, so there's plenty of liquidity there in terms of battles and things to do, but you've got to allow for people who haven't grown up with social games, right? You've got to let kids explore, and that's, I think, how you compensate for kind of player liquidity within the game.
So, in terms of digital card games, you know, one of the major things I think that I'm getting from all of this is that there's different adaptations to sort of a basic game mechanic, and so you know, as I imagine, for instance, in your case, the game mechanics are very different than you would have a physical or a card game in the West compared to the East, and so how do you translate those game mechanics as you build the business?
So yeah, let me explain some kind of the history of the Japanese mobile social games or the card games. I think those kind of mobile social card games in Japan directly comes from the traditional collective card games the industry. It comes from the purely the social gaming industry. So I think, as you may know, there was the Mafia Wars. It is still a very popular game from Jenga. So the Mafia Wars. Based on the Mafia Wars, there was the second generation of the Mafia Wars in Japan, which was very, very popular. Adding some kind of collecting treasure and also collecting the MMORPG stuff into the Mafia Wars. That was called Kaito Royale, which is in Japan. And then based on the second generation Mafia Wars game, and then the Konami and also several other developers developed the mobile social card battle games. And based on those kind of Mafia Wars type of game, we introduced collective card game mechanics and also the card fusion mechanics and also evolving the card mechanics. That is the third generation, and also that's the current social card game design. And then I think because of this history, we naturally had the asynchronous battle play and the RPG style kind of the standalone progressive gameplay, and they're combining with the collective card games. I think that's because that's the reason why it's different, the game design from the traditional trading card game.
Okay, so and as we then translate that into the other way around. Like how do you deal, for instance, with all the different platforms that we have in the West, right? So you mentioned, so Robert, you mentioned, say, Congregate, Facebook, mobile. How do you maintain sort of a coherent property across all those different platforms?
It's definitely a challenge. We've taken special care of thinking about. It kind of goes back to the question you asked before about synchronous play.
Sure.
Synchronous play, we learned really early on with Clash that it's extremely important. And we just did not have critical mass when we launched the game, and that was very difficult for some of the things we have in there, like drafts. Drafts are a huge part of our game now. So we have made sure that throughout all of these, at least all the web-based platforms right now, that people can actually engage in synchronous play between the different platforms. Someone can be playing on Facebook, someone can be playing on Congregate, someone can be playing on Kabam and Armored Games, and they can all enter the same draft, and they can all play each other. What that does is it helps those drafts fire more often. Those are a high monetization source for us, so that's worked really well. We're going to have a challenge when the game enters mobile, and exactly how we're going to do that, because especially with the high acquisition costs that are in mobile right now, it's a little going to be interesting to figure out. But we have handled this game differently than we've handled other cross-platform games just because of that. So.
One of the things that kind of strikes me, and this is not, of course, to bash those who are not present here to defend themselves, but traditionally in the physical space, say a Pokemon, owned by Nintendo, is a very, very dominating franchise. So what gives, right? So what does it mean that they're not as dominant, say, on the iOS platform or say on Facebook? What's the opportunity, in other words?
Well, I think everything changes. I mean, you look at if you look at kids right now, you're dealing with a generation that's grown up with immediate access to the internet, at a much younger age than anyone here. They've grown up with access to a level of UI and UX sophistication that we never had or would have even dreamed of, frankly. I mean, from the age of what, 1, 2 kids are in front of touch screens. So there's an expectation there, I think, in terms of experience, which a lot of the older companies that have been around just can't match. And I think kids in particular are going to be a hugely disruptive wave as they get older and older. I mean, if you look at where all the big kids' entertainment brands are being created, they're being created by games which are rising up, as opposed to, say, 10 years ago when it was like toy designers who were pushing something down. I mean, that's completely changed. So, I think to your Pokemon question, I think it's at least partially related to that.
If I could also, I think social companies that are not social game companies or mobile game companies that have come from a more traditional background, when we've gone out and talked to people and talked about licensing and talked about bringing people's properties onto these platforms, they're just like super obtuse about how it works, and they really just think like it's like, okay, well, give us $500,000 up front and this and that, and it's like, no, like we could take that $500,000 and churn out something that's completely our own and really dominate the space with it.
The reason I'm laughing is that there's an argument I have with a very good friend of mine about taking their game IP and bringing it to other platforms like trading cards and things like that. And I think historically, we in the games industry have been pretty terrible at thinking outside of the core games industry, right? So yeah, I totally agree with you.
Well, I think there's a challenge too for something like Pokemon that already has an established game mechanic or has an established play cycle that to translate that to social or mobile would be difficult in some different aspects. I think what makes digital special is the crazy stuff that we can do with it. And since they're already locked into the constraints of a physical card game, like you were saying that you saw with Chaotic, is that it's just honestly it's probably not as interesting as the stuff that you can do when you can just kind of make shit up as you go. I mean, that's a lot cooler to have cards that duplicate themselves, and you don't have to keep track of them in your deck. And then when something depletes, you can take all those cards out, and you can just keep track of things that just aren't possible in a physical card game. And so when you compare those side by side, yeah, you might not recognize the brand of Clash of the Dragons versus Pokemon, but hopefully we've made a more engaging, interesting game, and really have taken advantage of these tools that are available to us on a digital platform.
I think as well, particularly with kids, I mean, it's not enough just to give them static content anymore, right? Which I think backs up your point. You've got to give them the ability to create, right? So I mean, in Fight My Monster, kids can either create directly their own cards or they're uniquely generated. So we've got like maybe 7 or 8 million cards circulating around the environment or the universe at the moment, right? But you've got to give them the control, because I think increasingly they're going to get bored with static content. Yep.
And also, not to, your point about Clash of the Dragons versus Pokemon, if we took Clash of the Dragons and just made it a literal card game, physical card game version of it, it would be terrible to play. Yeah. Right? And it's designed very specific, same way Pokemon was designed very specifically originally to be a physical card game. This is designed very specifically to be a digital card game. So I think that's part of it also.
So, and then maybe E.G., compared to, coming from a Japanese market, what I'm getting from some of this is that there is a degree to which licensing is a very important component. So what are your thoughts on that in terms of building a domestic market and international expansion?
Yeah, I think using the famous IP will be really, really helpful to get the bigger audience very easily. So that is, I think, I would think the next 6 months or 1 year that there will be many IP licensed the card game or the social games in the market. So as the market grows and also as developer learn how to monetize it, they can afford or they can accept the licensing cost to develop the IP-themed game. So I think what happened in the past, especially in the Japanese market, is so we started to develop and also improve the original IPs. But as market grows and also as everyone learns the same game mechanics or same game design best practice, then the differentiation point will be the IP. Because in general, those IP has the exclusive rights for the developers. So, for example, there is really successful the card games, which is the FIFA licensed game, which is now on #1 on the Greek platform, and also the Gundam-themed card games, and the Final Fantasy themed game, and also many games. And also we recently announced that we are launching the Naruto themes, the card games, so which is going to be very huge. So I think the same things will happen in US market next 6 months.
Are those games using a classic licensing model, or are they using more like kind of specific to the industry, like revenue shares, and how are those different than or the same as regular licensing?
It depends title, but I think in general the minimum guarantee upfront and also the revenue share. That is the very basic terms.
Interesting. So then I would like to turn it upside down and say, okay, so we've spoken about, in the traditional market, you'd have the dominance of Pokemon, and you have a few of the franchises that really just take, the bulk of the audience as customer base. So, one way to express this is say, well, there's, in gameplay for card games, it's very important to have the benefit of network effects, right? If it's just me with my deck, then I can't play against anybody. So if there is opportunity in digital space, it sounds like in many ways we're sort of fragmenting the market in different directions, right? So we have different audiences that we cater to. We have different approaches and strategies. Won't we thereby undermine the benefit of network effects? Aren't we going to end up with too small of a user base to be sustainable?
I think one of the good strengths of the online virtual card game is since they have the high LTV, then even with the smaller audience, I mean the several hundred K, that user volume, still developer can make it profitable. So that is very good things for developer. And also I believe compared to the real physical card games, the network effects will be a bit weak than the real world, because in the millions of users are playing the online games, and also player can easily find the same card game players and on the online. So I think there will be a little bit fragmented, many card games in the online, but still each of them can be profitable.
Dylan, you have a thought on that? Because you have a particular niche that's only, 8 to 12-year-olds, so it's a relatively small size in the market, right?
Yeah, and as I said earlier, I mean, it's almost completely outside of conventional social networks, so it is trickier. I mean, I think, in terms of fragmentation, I mean, I think in general, there's a lot of fragmented markets out there. I think with under 13 gaming, because it's that bit more difficult to do, it's probably not maybe quite as fragmented as others, but only marginally. I think in terms of really trying to take advantage of that network effect when you've got a lot of stuff out there, it kind of comes back to thinking about your game a little bit more as a brand, and maybe not going crazy about it, but is there a way to sort of extend what you're doing virtually into a physical sense, right? And I'm not saying sort of going out and licensing everything from socks to teacups, but you know, I mean, if there are things that you can engage with your players on, which give them some physical, tangible representation of your game,
right,
that's something they're going to show to other people, right? And with all the social networks just getting clogged up with sort of absolutely everything right now, if I can give you something that's physical and cool and awesome, and even if it's a pair of boxer shorts or something like that, whatever, right?
Thank you.
You're welcome. You know. But all of a sudden you thought about it, and you're like, oh, okay, this is interesting, and obviously it would need to be game related, right? But so to me, you know,
in-game boxer shorts.
In-game boxer shorts. It's the future. It's the next platform after mobile. But
that would be in boxer shorts game.
This is getting too complicated. But my point is, I mean, I think, you know, you shouldn't ignore the physical aspect of physically sharing stuff with people in terms of bringing them into the game experience.
Yeah, we totally agree with that, because so our newest game, which has been really successful for us, is Legacy of Heroes, and it's a trading card game, collectible card game that we launched exclusively on Congregate. We're going to go, you know, proliferate across all our platforms, you know, profusely soon. But it's a superhero themed game, and you know, my background before doing games was in comics, and so I have a lot of contacts with, you know, high-end comic book artists, and you know, our desire was to create a comic book game that was really, you know, really rang true to people who were fans of that kind of entertainment. And so we're working with all these like professional comic book artists, professional comic book writers, making this, and we're like, oh, you know, we should be making comic books, you know, with our characters and telling these stories. So you know, there's going to be, you know, digital comics and, you know, print comics, and you know, we're working with a sculptor on toys, and you know, it's because we want these things to exist, and we want, you know, we have this very engaged player base, and we want to also let them, you know, continue to inhabit the brand and proselytize it. Right.
I mean, it's one of the funny things I find about the games industry in general is that we're the biggest entertainment industry in the world right now, right? But if you look,
a bell to ring, ding, ding,
I know,
ding, ding, ding.
But if you look at how the movie world does it or the music world does it, I mean, merchandising is second nature to them, right? I mean, if I go outside, I mean, there'll be a bunch of Dark Knight Rises merchandise that I can probably buy. With games, we're crap at that, right? And it does impact.
Got an Angry Birds hat for you.
Well, and you know, if you look at what Rovio have done and what Moshi have done as well, I mean, I think they've really blazed a trail on that. But there's not very many people doing it, and it does work as a user acquisition tactic. I mean, if you know, again, I don't want to skew this too much into kids, but if you look at things like Moshi, you've got a lot of kids, or girls in particular, who are buying Moshi items who haven't played the game and are using the unique code to get into the game. I mean, as an acquisition tool done the correct way, it does work.
Yeah.
Or boxer shorts.
Yeah.
Unique codes on them.
Coated boxer shorts. So yeah, so you know, and to kind of round that out in my own mind is to, you know, to bring up, for instance, how Pokemon has started publishing their decks, their physical decks, with a code as well, which allows you to basically just translate the whole thing into digital gameplay, and then finding opponents online. I can't speak to how successful they are on this, but I think that that's really sort of, you know, existing in both worlds is really kind of the challenge, but that's also where the major opportunity exists for all of the reasons that you mentioned. So with that said, I don't know if there's going to be lots of questions that we should address right now. I'm happy to open it up, or we could just tie it off and then do sort of a walk-on.
Yeah, so are there any questions?
Okay.
Okay.
There we go.
I have a question for you guys about Magic. And other than being first to market, so more from a game design perspective, what are one or two things that you think they did that helped them get to the size that they are? And also, what's one or two things that they did that you think were sort of limiting for them?
Well, I mean, I think it's a difficult question to answer. So, I mean, I know a lot of people will talk about mana screw as something, like the idea of the land as resources, as being something that's probably a thing they did wrong, and a lot of people have tried to correct that in other iterations of that type of card game, and I disagree with them. So I gotta tell you, I've played Magic almost every day since 1994. So you're going to be hard-pressed to get me to say that there's something I think that they've done wrong, because that would mean there's something very, very wrong with me. and there may very well be.
It's way too much
I mean,
Kool-Aid. Way too much Kool-Aid.
What I think they've done well is just give people that ability to have these very different strategies. Really, this idea to like be able to, I have what I think of as my Magic identity, right? I always play blue-green decks. I always draft blue-green decks. I, tend to like these kind of deck manipulation and steal and counter, and and it's just this expression of how I play, and it's very different than the expression of how the other people I play with play. And it feels, unique to me, and I know it's only one of like maybe 10 possibilities that are out there, but it feels like mine. And I think that that's what's really magical and really super empowering about the game, that just makes you feel great when you're playing it.
I know one other thing too is it's more I think a business decision that they made, but it does bleed in design. Is though how much they push events. I mean, that's really one of the things that I've always enjoyed, and they've designed around that. Drafting formats and these different sealed formats, and obviously Pro Tour and all that stuff. Is that they really encourage people to get together and play, and I think that's brilliant. And honestly, it's a ton of fun.
Any other questions from the floor?
So you guys have different backgrounds and different demographics. And I know that Japan obviously has a different style and different, identity than a lot of the American companies. But one question I'm wondering is, do you, especially in the U.S. market, but also I'm interested to hear about your European examples about a different type of demographic that still might be interested in this type of game. So for an example, can you envision, because still most of your demographic are men of a certain age range, right? And then you're young men. And but is there like the idea of could there be a collectible card game for like 40 to 50-year-old women, like a shopping card game? I mean, I don't know. Do you think that this is really inherent to men? And
isn't that what magazines are?
Yeah. Well, I mean, do you really see that really the demographic for all these games are going to stay about the same, or is it going to be different?
I definitely think that there's a pool of players who've been, inoculated with trading card games. Like they're used to them. They know how to play them, and that is generally male. But I think that if you look, as the Pokemon players get older, there's going to be a lot more women who play Pokemon. That had probably, I think, the most even split of male and female players. If you look at the demographics of Magic tournaments, I'm seeing more and more women at those events all the time. I think it's difficult if you haven't played a trading card game, regardless of gender, to pick it up in your 40s and 50s and just go, oh yeah, I get this, and start playing. So I don't think so, but I don't think it's gender specific. I think it's just, if you haven't had that experience, I think that that's probably a weird age to suddenly become attracted to that.
Yeah, I think at a sort of at a kid level, I mean, there's a big difference emotionally between a 10-year-old boy and a 10-year-old girl, right? I mean, again, I know, shocking. The like 10-year-old boy just isn't as emotionally sophisticated on average, right? So, it's probably, if you look at where Moshi is right now, and it's a virtual world, there's a lot more, emotional engagement in there versus Fight My Monster, which is a trading card game, and it's well, you're there to do battle, and that's pretty much it, right? So at that age, I don't know. I suspect it'll probably always skew pretty heavily male. But as they grow older, I don't know, I wouldn't underestimate the impact Big Bang Theory has had just in terms of educating girls and women about trading cards.
Yeah. Joost, do you want to wrap up with some concluding remarks?
If there's no more questions, there's, I think, one
We're
more.
just coming up on the hour here, so okay, this will be the last question.
There you go, last one.
Yes, from a design perspective, I was wondering how you guys...
Oh, how did that happen?
Hello? Oh. Over here.
Hello. Two questions.
It's like I come with my own microphone.
Hi guys, prepared.
Self microphone.
Wow. All right, we'll take your question and then please come up to the stage afterwards and we'll talk. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was wondering how you guys prioritize the development of new features for your games, in the metagame or in the in-game experience, and also how responsive you are to your community in terms of developing and planning those features.
I would love to answer that question. We are, honestly, we talk a lot about that we are analytics informed, we're not analytics driven. So we really, when we look at a new feature, it needs to be fun above all else. And I know that's kind of a generic answer that most people give, but that's really what drives a lot of what we do. we have heavy community involvement in our games. One of the great things about Congregate is they have live chat. And any given time we'll have 1,000 to 2,000 players in chat. They broke them up into different rooms, but we have a full-time community manager for Clash of the Dragons, and he's in chat a few hours every single day. And between the rest of the dev team, we have a few people that are there cumulatively a few more hours a day. We're on our forums every single day. We probably, as a dev team, have close to 10,000 posts on our forums, and the game's been live for a year. And so we really listen to everything that's posted there. We read every single post. We take it one step further by having player councils. So it's we just had our Clash Player Council about a month ago, where we picked 6 people from the community, and we flew them out to our office for the weekend, and we spent the weekend showing them new features that we were working on, crazy ideas that we had, design docs, and got feedback from them. And we tried to get a wide variety of players. So we had a whale, somebody that had spent a lot of money on the game. We had a free player that had never monetized on our game. We had people that were just focused on PvP, people that were just focused on drafting, people that were really just interested in the single player experience, to get every aspect that we could think of and that was important to the game, and get feedback on these features. And so there's no direct monetization result of that, but it was something that was really important to us. We've now done it in all of our games, and because we find that the players know the game better than we do. I mean, they're amazing how much time they spend on the game and how well they understand it.
The computing power is unbelievable.
Yes, it really is. So I think between the live chat and the a lot of time spent on the forums and the councils, we get tons of just invaluable feedback, and we iterate on a weekly basis. We have a new build every single week since the game went live, and we're going to continue to do that. And we're still a pretty small team, pretty agile, so we can get things in pretty quickly based on their feedback.
So, in conclusion then, it seems that the way that collectible card games are going to continue to iterate and evolve into digital space has a lot to do with the affordances of new technologies, of the new features that we can find in terms of synchronous gameplay, new game mechanics like fusion, and sort of building on these features and abilities in a world where the dominant license holders may play a much more muted role. And so I invite you all to come up and ask more questions right after we thank our panel for coming out today. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Nicely played.
Thank you.